Bring on the colors for our opening ceremony.
Bring your food over here.
Here comes Big John McBride, the pride of our organization, playing for us to bring the colors in. Once again, the Scottish American Military Society, post 1889, begins to present our colors. These are proud folks who served in the British Armed Forces, United States Armed Forces. And on the north end of the grounds, the 79th New York Highlanders, Company C, as part of the Cameron Highlanders of the Northwest. This group is a non-profit organization dedicated to developing youth into responsible community members, teaching them leadership skills throughout Civil War reenactments. The real 79th New York served in the Union Army during the American Civil War from 1861 to 1864 and was led by our own Governor Isaac Stevens, state of Washington. Please rise for the colors.
Damaged United States cruiser Boise, given up for lost, makes port with the most amazing record of the war. The score, painted on the bridge, 6 Jap warships sunk in 27 minutes. Admiral King, commander of the fleet, comes aboard to salute and decorate her gallant crew. Against overwhelming odds, the Boise skipper, Captain Mike Moran, brought his ship through. And now the boys are ready to go back for more.
The next class of cruisers started by the U.S. was the 7 9,700-ton light cruisers of the Brooklyn class, beginning construction as the first 5 New Orleans were finishing and the last 2 were well underway. These ships were a direct response to the recent Japanese Mogami class. If the so-called tin-clad Pensacola's, Northamptons, and Portlands could be called light heavy cruisers, then the Brooklyns could be called heavy light cruisers. In fact, they were used as heavy cruisers, that is to say, as mini battleships, rather than as destroyer leaders and scouts. Brooklyn was started March 12, 1935, and completed September 30, 1937. Philadelphia was started May 28, 1936, and completed September 23, 1937. Savannah was started May 31, 1934, and completed March 10, 1938. Nashville was started January 24, 1935, and completed June 6, 1938. Phoenix was started April 16, 1935, and completed October 3, 1938. Boise was started April 1, 1935, and completed August 12, 1938. Honolulu was started September 10, 1935, and completed June 15, 1938. All were planned to be upgraded near the end of the war, with new secondary guns and blisters as they came in for repair of serious damage. While only Savannah got both following her damage in the Mediterranean, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and Honolulu did receive the blisters. Light and medium AA, along with radar, was improved throughout the war. So successful was the design that it would be the basis for most following cruiser classes. Decommissioned throughout 1946 and early 1947, most would go on to be sold to South American countries, where they would continue to see service as late as the 1980s. The 2 improved ships of the St. Louis class are described later. Main armament was a staggering 15 6-inch 47 caliber guns that fired a super heavy 130 as opposed to the Omaha's 105-pound shells in 5 triple turrets, 3 forward and 2 aft, with turret 2 raised to fire over turrets 1 and 3. Rate of fire was up to 7 rounds per minute per gun. Secondary armament was again 8 single open midship mounted 5-inch 25 caliber AA guns, 4 mounts on either side of the ship. To free up room midship, aircraft handling was moved to the stern. 4 float planes could be launched from 2 catapults or stored in the below decks hangar. For propulsion, these ships used 8 boilers in 4 rooms. These generated 100,000 horsepower to drive the ships up to 33 knots. To save weight and space, the unit principle of putting an engine room between boiler rooms 2 and 3 was not used. Instead, auxiliary diesel generators were fitted to supply power in case all the boilers were knocked out. Armor was on par with contemporary heavy cruisers of the New Orleans class. Side armor was up to 5 inches thick. Deck armor was up to 2 inches. Turret armor was up to 6.5 inches. Barbette armor was up to 6 inches. Brooklyn spent the entire war in the Atlantic. She was on convoy escort duty when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. She spent most of 1942 escorting convoys. In November 1942, she took part in the North African landings before returning to convoy defense. In 1943, she took part in the Sicilian and Italian invasions, where she provided fire support. In late 1944, she again provided fire support for the invasion of southern France. Returning to the East Coast in November 1944, she would spend the rest of the war in overhaul and training. Philadelphia was at the Boston Naval Yard undergoing overhaul when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. She would also spend the entire war in the Atlantic. She spent most of 1942 escorting convoys and then providing fire support for the North African invasion. In 1943 and 44, she provided fire support for the Sicilian and Italian and southern France invasions. She also was in overhaul when the war ended. Savannah was in New York Harbor on December 7, 1941. She spent most of the first half of 1942 on patrol in the Atlantic. In late 1942, she provided fire support for the North African invasion. In the first quarter of 1943, she sailed to the southern Atlantic to hunt German commerce raiders. Next, she sailed to the Mediterranean to cover the Sicilian and Italian invasions. On September 11, 1943, she was hit by a 3,000-pound Fritz radio-controlled glide bomb off Salerno. Penetrating turret 3, the damage was severe. Holes were blown in the keel and out her port side. Only determined damage control saved the ships. She arrived at the East Coast on December 23, 1943 for repairs and upgrades. Repairs were finally finished almost a year after being hit. In September 1944, having traded her older style open mount 5-inch 25 caliber guns for the new 5-inch 38 in 4 dual enclosed turrets similar to the St. Louis class. She spent the rest of the war escorting the President to the Yalta Conference, patrolling the Mediterranean, and as a training ship. Nashville was patrolling the Atlantic when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. In early March 1942, she joined the new carrier Hornet and escorted her to the Pacific and through the Doolittle raid. In mid-May 1942, she headed north and spent most of the rest of the year in Alaskan waters to help stop Japanese operations there. In late December 1942 through May of 1943, she operated in the Solomons, escorting convoys and attacking Japanese bases as U.S. troops began moving up the island chain. On May 12, 1943, she suffered a magazine explosion, which sent her back to the West Coast for repairs that would last until August of 1943. Returning to the action, she would continue to provide fire support until December 13, 1944, when she was hit by a kamikaze off Negros Island. Repairs would last until mid-April 1945. Returning to the action, she would spend the rest of the war providing fire support and escorting carriers in the East Indies. Phoenix was at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked. She spent the first half of 1942 escorting convoys between Pearl Harbor and the West Coast, Australia, and India. From mid-1942 till mid-1943, she escorted convoys and provided fire support to troops fighting in New Guinea. After a refit at the East Coast, she returned to the Southwest Pacific and continued to escort convoys and provide fire support as the troops moved north up New Guinea to the Philippines, most notably at the Battle of Surigao Strait. From mid-1945, she provided fire support to troops as they liberated the East Indies. She was on her way back to Pearl Harbor for overhaul when Japan surrendered. Boise was in the Philippines as part of the U.S. Asiatic Fleet when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Joining the multinational force to defend the East Indies, she grounded on a reef near Java on January 21, 1942. The damage sent her first to Sri Lanka and then the West Coast for repairs, which were completed in late June 1942. Next, she escorted a convoy to New Zealand and Fiji. At the overnight Battle of Cape Esperance, she was hit in the forward magazine by 2 8-inch shells, knocking out turrets 1, 2, and 3, killing everyone there. Only saved by determined damage control and inrushing water, the ship headed to the East Coast for repairs. With repairs at the East Coast completed by April 1943, she spent the rest of 1943 providing fire support for the invasion of Sicily and Italy before returning to the Pacific at the start of 1944. She spent all of 1944 and the first half of 1945 providing fire support to troops along New Guinea, the Philippines, and then the East Indies, most notably being part of the Battle of Surigao Strait. At the beginning of July 1945, she returned to the West Coast for overhaul and was there when Japan surrendered. Honolulu was at Pearl Harbor when Japan attacked. From January 1942 until late May 1942, she escorted convoys between the U.S. and Australia. From June of 1942 till November, she was in Alaskan waters to stop Japanese operations there. From November of 1942 till July 1943, she operated in the Solomons, taking part in the battles of Tassafarunga and Kula Gulf. At the overnight Battle of Kolombangara, she was hit by a 24-inch long lance torpedo that sent her to the west coast with her bow blown off. Returning to action in mid-December 1943, she continued to provide fire support for invasion after invasion. On October 20th, 1944, she was hit by an aircraft torpedo while covering the Leyte invasion. Returned to the East Coast, she would sit out the rest of the war being repaired.
USS Boise was a light cruiser of the Brooklyn class in the United States Navy. The cruiser was named for Boise, the capital city of the state of Idaho. Commissioned in 1938, she saw extensive service during World War II, taking part in fighting in the Mediterranean and Pacific theaters. Following the war, the ship was decommissioned in 1946 and lay idle until sold to Argentina in 1951. Renamed Nueve de Julio, the ship remained in service with the Argentinian Navy until 1978, after which she was taken to Brownsville, Texas and scrapped in 1983. Construction and career. Commissioning and interwar period. Boise was launched on 3 December 1936 by Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, Newport News, Virginia, sponsored by Miss Salome Clark, the daughter of Governor Clark of Idaho. The ship commissioned on 12 August 1938 with Captain Benjamin Vaughan McCandlish in command. In February 1939, following a shakedown cruise to Monrovia, Liberia and Cape Town, Union of South Africa, Boise joined Cruiser Division 9, Battle Force, at San Pedro, California. Until November 1941, she operated alternately off the West Coast and in Hawaiian waters. She then escorted a convoy to Manila, Philippine Islands, arriving on 4 December. World War II. The outbreak of war in the Philippines on 8 December 1941 found Boise off Cebu Island. On 9 January 1942, Task Force 5 was in northern Australian waters. Boise, with the task force commander, Rear Admiral Glassford, aboard, departed Darwin that day with Marblehead and destroyers Barker, Parrot, Bulmer, Stewart and Pope escorting the Dutch ship Bloemfontein that was transporting hastily restowed supplies. Artillery and artillerymen of the 26th Field Artillery Brigade, Headquarters Battery and the 1st Battalion, 131st Field Artillery that had arrived with the Pensacola convoy to Surabaya. She rejoined the other elements of TF-5 in the East Indies, but on 21 January 1942 she struck an uncharted shoal in Sape Strait and had to retire to Colombo, Ceylon, Bombay, India, a Mare Island Navy Yard for repairs, which in essence saved her from being destroyed with the rest of the Allied ships during the various battles around Java. Her repairs completed, she sailed on the 22nd of June to escort a convoy to Auckland, New Zealand. Boise returned to Pearl Harbor and was tasked to conduct a raiding cruise in Japanese waters in hopes of creating an impression, including generating radio traffic, of a striking force heading for Japan to draw attention away from preparations for Guadalcanal. Boise departed Pearl Harbor the 27th of July and was expected to begin this raid on the Japanese sampan patrol line guarding approaches to Horseshoe about 750 miles east of Tokyo on 5 August. She completed the raid on 8 August. 2 seaplanes that had to land on the water at sunset were lost, one being found by the Japanese with indications this caused apprehension of a strike force preparing to attack Japan. In August, she escorted a convoy to Fiji and New Hebrides. From 14 to 18 September, she helped cover the landing of Marine reinforcements on Guadalcanal. On the night of 11–12 October 1942, during the Battle of Cape Esperance, the task force of which Boise was part encountered a force of Japanese cruisers and destroyers to the west of Guadalcanal. In the engagement, Boise was hit a number of times, twice by fire from a Japanese heavy cruiser from about 7,500 yards range. One hit exploded upon impact on her armor, causing little damage. The other exploded in the 6-in magazine located between number I and 2 turrets, causing a powder fire and flooding, putting turrets on 2 and 3 out of action and causing a number of casualties. A total of 107 crew were killed by the fire, under the command of Captain Mike Moran, who was later awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership during the battle. Boise made her way to Philadelphia Navy Yard, where she underwent repairs from the 19th of November 1942 to the 20th of March 1943. The gunfire damage was the first case available for complete Bureau of Ships analysis. It was discovered that one of the shells was of English manufacture. Boise departed on the 8th of June for the Mediterranean, arriving at Algiers, Algeria on the 21st of June. For the 10th of July to the 18th of August, she acted as a cover and fire support ship for the amphibious Battle of Gela during the invasion of Sicily. In September, she took part in the Italian mainland landings at Taranto and Salerno. She returned to New York on the 15th of November, and once again steamed to the South Pacific, arriving at Milne Bay, New Guinea on the 31st of December. During January to September 1944, she took part in operations along the northern shore of New Guinea, including Madang, Alexis Hafen bombardment, Humboldt Bay landings, Wakatsa war bombardment, Wakatome landings, Bike landings, No M4 landings, Cape San Sapor landings, and the occupation of Moriatai. The cruiser then moved north as the battlefront advanced into the Philippines, taking part in Leyte invasion, Battle of Surigao Strait, Mindoro landings, Leyte Mindoro covering action, Lingayen Gulf landings, with General Douglas MacArthur embarked, Luzon covering force, Batan Corregidor occupation, and Zamboanga landings. She then moved to Borneo for the Tarakan landings. From 3 to 16 June, she carried General MacArthur on a 3,500 miles tour of the central and southern Philippines and Brunei Bay, Borneo, and then returned to San Pedro, California, arriving on the 7th of July. Though she remained undergoing overhaul and training until October, she sailed on the 3rd of October for the East Coast, arriving at New York on the 20th of October. Boise remained there until decommissioned on the 1st of July 1946. Argentine Navy Boise was sold to Argentina on the 11th of January 1951, along with Phoenix, where they were commissioned as Nueve de Julio and Siete de Octubre respectively. During her years as an Argentinian warship, she took part of the Revolución Libertadora, shelling oil depots and military facilities around the coastal city of Mar del Plata. On the 19th of September 1955, she was accidentally rammed by General Belgrano on exercises in 1956, which resulted in damage to both cruisers. Nueve de Julio remained in service with the Argentine Navy until 1978, when she was decommissioned and towed to Brownsville, Texas. Awards. Boise received 11 battle stars for her service in World War II.